Happy Tuesday and happy February, NCAA men's basketball fans. This is your TrogCast, two really old guys talking men's basketball. Jeff Zink here, and I'm joined by my faithful compadre, Jim Reaker. Jim, how you doing on this blustery, rainy day here in Cincinnati?
Oh, I'm doing well. You know, we're past football season now, and it's time to focus on NCAA basketball. We got that little football game out of the way on Sunday evening, and so attention turns to now the NCAA, and we're all looking forward to March Madness.
That's right. We're only about a month away from the end of the regular season, and then it'll be the madness of the tourney. So some things tighten up. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll give one of our weekly previews to the West Coast Conference. Of course, we'll get your Fort Wayne update. We'll go through sort of the upcoming games and how things look at the upcoming conference games going into winning the championship. Talk a little bit about rushing the court, but we'll start today with what I've sort of titled ranking schmankings. Let's just get to the tournament. Last week, number 2 Baylor, at that time those rankings, number 2 Baylor, number 3 Kansas, number 7 West Virginia, all Big 12, lost at home to unranked teams. So much for the home team theory, but it's not perfect. Number 9 Virginia lost to unranked Syracuse. And number 5, 8, and the new number 4, Louisville, all lost to ranked teams, but on the road. And that's just in the top 10 in what happened. It just shows that it's anybody's ball game. Anything goes. I'm like you, Jim. Let's start this, maybe do a 2-and-out tournament and get it going, because it's just anybody in the top 10, maybe top 15 seems like they could win it this year.
Yeah, it's almost like you don't want to be ranked. Those teams that get into the top 10, the last 2 weekends have been brutal to them. And again, in the Big 12, my conference, the thing that really was surprising, that the top 3 went down all at home. We've talked about the home court advantage that there always usually seems to be in NCAA basketball, and that's not even holding true so much this year, especially in the Big 12.
Yeah, it's going to be. It's still fun. I think that's the thing that we're forgetting. It's no dominant team. Gonzaga does hold on to number 1 with 59 votes. Villanova sneaks back into the number 2 spot. People still aren't sold about Gonzaga. We'll talk about that when I give a little preview of the West Coast Conference. Louisville jumped up to number 4 and immediately lost to number 12 Virginia. Of course, there's mitigating circumstances. We'll talk about that when we get to the ACC. But just lots of ups and downs, which just made it a very, very exciting season. Before we go conference to conference, I know there's a topic that you wanted to talk about, we've talked about before in the season, and that has to go with the latest issue with students rushing the court and how this time it cost the team a victory.
Well, and I was actually watching that game live in an establishment. I wasn't listening to it, but I was kind of watching what was going on. And I've said before, I think the court rushing is one of the great traditions of NCAA basketball. When either you upset the number 1 team or highly ranked team in the country, or maybe just a big rival who at the time is considered higher ranked than you or having a better season. I think it's fun. It's fun for the kids. Of course, you've expressed before that you're concerned about the danger, and there have been some incidents where people have been injured when that sort of thing goes on. Kind of interesting, I don't know if you caught the Kansas State game last night, was the big late game on Big Monday, that Kansas State had prepared for a court rushing if they had upset Kansas, who of course is their major rival in the state of Kansas and a high-ranked team this year. They had a crew, it looked like about 20 or 25 security guards ready not to go out and stop the court rushing, but to go out and protect the Kansas team and coaches and get them off the floor in case that happened. And actually the announcers even talked about what they were going to do if that happened. I think it was Fran Fraschilla, I'm not sure who was with him. He asked him, have you ever been here for this game? Have you ever been here when during a Kansas State game when Kansas State won? He said no, and he says, well, I'm telling you right now, go under the table. Go under the table. He said they're safe. The people will go over them, but they are very, very firm. So it was kind of a joking thing, but I think they were half serious that they too wanted to get out of the way if it happened. Of course, Kansas won the game, so they didn't have to deal with that. The other thing, I've been trying to read and I don't know if the A10 is trying to come across as they don't want to be considered no fun, but they're saying it wasn't the court rushing that caused the technical to be called, that it was somebody grabbed the basketball off the baseline, not allowing VCU to inbound it with 0.4 seconds left. And also, this is what confuses me. They said the other violation was somebody running into one of the officials. Well, who was that if they weren't storming the court, or where did that take place? They didn't really give a real clear clarification, but they just wanted everybody to know it wasn't the court storming that the technical was called on. Your thoughts, and I don't know if you got a chance to see that. I'm sure you've seen the replays and read a little bit about it.
It's odd, and it's a topic we've talked about before. I've got several thoughts on it. We'll go first to the St. Bonnie game. One of the issues is, and it's about the same things we've talked about before, is who handles this. In this case, it was the referees making the decision, and it looks like the conferences backed them. Certain conferences have rules about it or try to enforce it. The NCAA doesn't have any blanket rule. So it's kind of hard to know what's going on there. My thoughts from earlier in the year are the same. I've got no problem with students doing it. It's part of rite of passage. It's tearing down the goalpost. It's become a bit too common, if you ask me. It's like it's become streaking. I'm really being a trog there to bring that up. Streaking or the wave. I mean, it's fan participation. Some of these games aren't that big a game. I mean, at Syracuse, they did it twice last week. And, yeah, they were upsets of ranked teams, and the Big Orange is coming back. But it's almost like the students are looking for any excuse to storm the court, and it's just part of the fun of being in college. And I'm okay with that as long as the things I said before, that it's a celebration of their own teams. There's no taunting of the losing team, that they are careful enough that people don't get injured. Like you say, they're jumping over tables. They've had one or two too many adult beverages. There still aren't that many conferences that allow alcohol sales in their stadiums, but it's going bigger and bigger, or in select areas. Like I said, the big thing there is just how do you control it and how do you do it? One of the biggest problems with it, to me, Jim, is the new rules about watching the clock at the end of the game. Students storm the court, and this is sort of what happened in the Bonaventure game. The court clock went to zero. But, of course, the officials had to huddle and look at the TV and say, is there a microsecond left? Did this happen? Did that happen? And that, to me, that's just irksome. But this kind of ruins it. It's happened 3 or 4 times this year where fans have stormed the court, and then they've had to get them off the court so that they can play 0.6 of a second or 0.3 of a second or 1.1, whatever it is, because they can no longer allow for human reaction time. It's got to be exactly what the TV said. So that's a bit of a problem. I don't know how the kids overcome that. And how you do it. It's a tradition, great. You just got to be careful with it.
Yeah, and you bring up another topic maybe for future discussion on this show. The whole time and checking the monitor, especially in the last minute, the things they can review. It's almost become commonplace that they're going to stop the game and review to make sure the clock's right or make sure that they made the call right on who the ball went out of bounds on their call, which I guess is all good in fairness. You want to get it right at the end of the game, but it's almost become part of the end of the game strategy. I can't remember which game it was just recently that Xavier was playing, and I remember watching. It might have been against Creighton, where Chris Mack asked for something to be reviewed, maybe the clock or if it really went off his player out of bounds. And the commentators even picked up. They said, well, Chris Mack doesn't have a timeout left, but this is going to give him a chance to talk to his team. So, that, again, we have all this technology these days. And, again, I know you want things to be right. You don't want to see a bad call that changes the outcome of a major game. I guess we just have to live with it, but it has changed it's kind of like it makes the last minute of the game. Once it starts, it's probably going to be 15 minutes later before the game actually ends sometimes.
Yeah, it does take forever. We'll talk about that. It is something that happens more and more often. And like I said, my biggest problem with it is they freeze frame the TV to say, okay, he started to make the call at 1.1 seconds, but they don't, the travel of sound, and then the person has to push the button. That human element's taken out of it. So maybe we're headed to robots. We don't know, but that's not going to eliminate the great season that NCAA men's is having, and the excitement's going to go into just making the 68 teams that are going to make the dance. But before we get to that, you might have some final thoughts on that, but it might be time to talk about how we're coming down to the end of these conference championships and where we sit with those. So you ready for that, or you got some more thoughts on the court?
No, we're ready. Only one thing is I heard last night, kind of interesting, with the Super Bowl being so exciting going into overtime, the first one ever. But think of what happened since last March when Chris Jenkins hit that shot at the buzzer. We have an NCAA game ended at the buzzer. We have a NBA championship where a team came back from down 3-1 in what many considered an upset win. You have the Cubbies winning the first one in an extra innings, Game 7. And now you have a Super Bowl that went into overtime, and plus you had an NCAA football championship that was decided on the last play. It's almost like the NCAA basketball set the tone for the year of unbelievable championship games. You couldn't ask for any better group of championship games, probably never been equaled in history. So what tone is NCAA basketball going to set for this year's sports season?
Well, I think that's going to depend upon how we go through these last conference games, and some of them are down to like the last 6 or 7 games. Most of them in that first weekend in March and then go into the tournaments. So let's go very quickly, just conference by conference. We'll let you start with your favorite, the Big East. The big game this week is, Villanova is coming to Xavier. Xavier got that big win against Creighton. They got a top 25 win. If Xavier wins, they're both tied at the top. If Nova wins, they've got a 2-game lead with 6 to play. And, of course, Creighton and Butler are still in the mix. So what are we going to see here at the end? And Nova still has to play both Butler and Creighton as well as Xavier through the end here.
Yeah, as I talked about before, what I hope the Musketeers would do is hold serve at home and then win about half the games on the road. And, of course, they lost that Creighton game, but they kind of made up for that this last weekend. And what a difference a game makes. Everybody was saying, some people were saying, was Xavier even going to make the tournament? Was their season over with the loss of Edmund Sumner? And, of course, they rebounded and had a couple of big freshmen step in Tyreek Jones, who went 8 for 8 and had 16 points. And, of course, Quentin Gooden, who replaced Sumner at the point guard, and he put up 15 points, only had 2 turnovers and 5 assists, and had was 4 for 7 from the 3-point line. Xavier, I think, is a little bit different team without Edmund Sumner, and it's one of those things that maybe they're better suited without him. They don't rely on him so much and seems to be playing better team ball. But back to the Big East, where does it stand? Yeah, hopefully that here, my concern is tomorrow night the Musketeers play DePaul. You cannot overlook DePaul. You cannot overlook anybody in this conference. The St. John's, the Georgetowns. At the bottom, you still got to play them tough, and they're going to bring their A game. And of course, winning at Centos would be a big win for DePaul. So they got to get through that game before they start thinking about Villanova. But yeah, that'll be a big game. Remember last year the Musketeers upset the Wildcats at the end of the season when Villanova was ranked number 1 in the country. Another big game not to overlook. Creighton seems to be falling. Of course, they lost Maurice Watson. But again, Butler doesn't seem to be playing as well as they did. They had a very disappointing loss to, Creighton and Georgetown. I think they've lost 2 in a row. And they go to Marquette tonight. That'll be a big game. And if you remember the Butler-Marquette game at Butler, Marquette had them down double digits and allowed the Bulldogs to come back and win that game. But it's going to be an exciting finish to the season. And just in general, we're talking about let's get to the tournament, the exciting part. But we got to remember that these conference league championships are very important to these schools, important for their fans, of course, but also I think they're important for recruiting. If you can go out and say to a high school student, we won the Big East, we won the Big 12 last year, you want to be part of something like that, a tradition, I think it helps the team. So let's not overlook the importance of these league championships, especially the regular season.
Well, that's why we're talking about them now, to try to hone in on that and the importance of these games. You know, you're right, Butler lost 2 and at home. So it's going to, let's switch to one of mine, and probably the most active. We could spend a whole show talking about the ACC. You know, my pick at the beginning of the year was the winner of that last Duke-UNC game, and I still think it's going to come down to that if UNC is the winner, and that's what's going to be here. North Carolina's in control. They're a game up. But in their last 7 games, they've got to play Duke twice, and the first one's a big game this Thursday in Cameron with Coach K back. We'll talk about that in a minute. They've got to play Virginia twice and Louisville once. So that's 5 of their last 7 games against teams that are highly ranked, and it's going to be a battle all the way through. And then when you go into it, they also have to play this new giant killer coming out of New York with Syracuse back in the mix. I don't know if you remember, I said early in the year that Coach Boeheim would have him back. I thought Coach Izzo and Boeheim would both get him that. They took down 2 ranked teams last year, and whether it was win 899 or win 1,000, that's a debate for another time. Of course, Virginia beat Louisville last night. Of course, that it was kind of expected with Mancock, Mafiang, and Deng Adele suspended for missing their curfew. But this one's going down to the wire, and there's 2 or 3 teams that could win it. You know, they're all going to the dance, but it's just going to be a fun, like you said, last month in the ACC. Of course, you brought up the topic in our pre-conference talk about Coach K returning to the sidelines, and that's when we'll see if we can get the chemistry going for the Dukies.
Yeah, we know they got a lot of talent there, and you've said when Coach K comes back, let's see where they are. One other thing I'd like to throw into the ACC and get your take on it is Notre Dame. Lost 5 of the last 6, and we were singing the praises. I think they started out like 5-0. Might have been like the last undefeated team in the ACC. What's your take on what's going on there? Are they just getting wore down? The schedule just overwhelming for them? And will they make it?
Oh, yeah. You know, when you look at the bracketology or you look at who's on the bubble and all that, Notre Dame's going to go to they're 17-7. I mean, they're basically in the same position Xavier's just talking about, and 6-5 in a very tough ACC. And when you look at their losses, I mean, they're not losing to cupcakes. They've lost to North Carolina, Duke, Georgia Tech, which is on the rise with Pastner down there, Virginia, Florida State, Purdue, and Nova. Now, those are all ranked teams except for Georgia Tech. But they have hit a space here where it is tough. They'll bounce back. Who knows? They're going to get 20 wins. But getting 20 wins in the ACC is a badge of honor, no matter how you get them. Notre Dame's going to be there. They're going to flop in and out of the top 25 here. They've got a chance to get their skate changed over here with Wake Forest tonight. Of course, then they got to turn around and play Florida State again, who they lost to there, but they'll have them at home. And then they got Boston College, North Carolina State, a chance for Georgia Tech at home, Boston College again before they face Louisville. So they'll get the ship righted. But every team sort of goes through one of these very brief skids, and this is their time.
Yeah, and I think probably we'll be talking about in a few weeks. It isn't going to be so much when we start picking who's going to do well in the NCAA, what their record is at that time, but more of what have they done in the last 10 games. How are they playing when they get to tournament time? I think that's almost more important this season than any other season, just because there are so many quality teams, especially from the Big Six conferences.
Well, let's move along because we've got plenty more to talk about. And let's first go to what's sort of become the forgotten conference. And then Big Ten, Joe Lunardi this week said that he thinks as many as 7 teams out of the Big Ten could make the dance. You've got Wisconsin, who's up 1 on Maryland and a game and a half on Purdue. But Purdue made their statement this week. They welcomed and then welcomed out Northwestern to the top 25 with a 21-point pasting. And then they beat Maryland in a very exciting game in the home court where they handled the court storming properly and got the students off at the proper times. But Wisconsin has the tougher schedule. They're up to number 7 now. They do have Maryland and Northwestern at home, So they've got Michigan State and Ohio State, both dangerous teams on the road, whereas the other teams don't have to face quite that many quality opponents there. And, of course, now we talked about Jim Boeheim, but now we got Tom Izzo. Can Wisconsin hold out, or maybe Izzo slip in there and play the Explorer? He's got games left against all three teams, Wisconsin, Maryland, and Purdue, going into the end of the season.
Well, I picked Wisconsin in the beginning, and I'm still going to say that they're going to win it. I just like the way they play team basketball and put an emphasis on defense. I think, again, that's the difference between college basketball and pro basketball, those two factors. But, yeah, you got to look at Purdue and Caleb Swanigan. And, again, if you have not seen him play, he is a massive player underneath. He's a rebounding machine, and he's a scorer, too. He can step out and hit the three. So I think Purdue will have a say-so in that how that figures out. But I don't think Purdue and Wisconsin play again. So I would pick them 1-2 maybe. And here's the one that there's some question about is Indiana. Indiana now still has a losing record in the conference, although they, of course, had some big wins early on. Of course, they've lost a key player, and James Blackman's still not playing, although they expect him back. I think there's an important game this Thursday. Purdue goes to Indiana, and if Indiana could pull that win, I don't know if you call it an upset, it's going to be on their home floor, that'll probably get them back into the discussion of being maybe the 6th or 7th team out of the Big Ten. But if Purdue goes in there, and especially if they defeat them soundly on their home floor, then the questions are still going to linger. Is IU really a tournament team? I think that we're going to be talking about that all the way down to Selection Sunday.
Yeah, and they've still got their home and home against Purdue, and they have to host Northwestern as well. So those will be three key games coming through there as we finish off the season. Well, things are a little topsy-turvy in the SEC as well. Kentucky, who we thought would run away with it, stumbled down in Gainesville and lost to the Gators. So South Carolina right now is in the lead, and they both have to play Florida. The one-and-dones aren't quite coming together the way Coach Cal wanted to. And now Frank Martin, who's had his ups and downs with the Gamecocks, is in a position to win the regular season there, but don't count out the Gators. They've pulled off a couple of big upsets, including the one just last Saturday against Kentucky. And this right now, what we thought would be a runaway for Kentucky is anybody's ball game. And all three are going to make the dance, and there's nobody else really challenging them. So it's going to come down to those three.
Yeah, and Kentucky, they've lost 3 of 4, and an overtime win over Georgia away from losing 4 in a row. And I'm going to go back to what I was just talking about. Why I like Wisconsin is why I don't like UK, saying that only as I don't like them doing very well at the end of this season, is because of their one-and-doners. They don't seem to play together all that much, and I think any UK fan will tell you right now they don't play defense very well. They've already taken in that NBA mantra of let's get it up and down the court, score as many times as we can, and play a little defense maybe when it really matters. But I think some UK fans are a little discouraged with this team and a little down on them. And the other thing about UK is they do have, I think, one more game with Florida. But because the SEC is probably the bottom of the top 6, they don't have a lot of other key games that could get them big wins. And, people are saying they maybe are slipping to a 3 or 4 seed coming down the stretch. So it'll be interesting to watch. I think they have a game against LSU tonight, who is 1-9 in the SEC. Now, if they lose that, you might have to go on suicide watch down in Lexington for some of their fans.
Well, we talked a couple of weeks ago about the importance of leadership, and that's what I think has not emerged in Kentucky, and that's where the Dukies are struggling a little bit too. They've got some strong people there. Harry Giles is getting more and more playing time, so we'll have to see who has the upward trend as we go through. As you said, it was topsy-turvy in the Big 12 last week. All 3 teams in the top 10 lost at home to unranked teams. Kansas slipped by Kansas State last night, and in the next 10 days, Kansas hosts West Virginia. That's this coming Monday, and then they have to go to Waco to play Baylor on the 17th. So it's going to be interesting to see if Kansas can hold on for, their 18th in a row, I think?
It'll be their 13th. I just read that this morning.
Mm-hmm. Going on?
I'll put my money on Kansas, and especially if you watched them last night going into Manhattan, Kansas State, and win that game on the road. And they're a team, despite a big loss, they lost Azubuike early in the season, but they did get Carlton Bragg back last night from a suspension. And they have those two guards, Frank Mason and Devontae Graham. And, in fact, I remember a Sports Illustrated story I read probably about a month ago that one of the keys to winning the NCAA championship is guard play when it comes to March. And they talked about how those two, along with the freshman Justin Jackson, who's about a 6'7", 6'8", kind of a wing player, but a slasher and a scorer too. If I was to have to bet today, I would almost put my money on Kansas being the NCAA champion this year. Of course, a lot of people are still pointing at Villanova because, again, they have three scorers and play consistent and play defense. But I think Kansas is going to win the Big 12, as always, but there's going to be some fun games to watch.
No, you're right. I mean, the person on the downside is Bobby Huggins' Mountaineers. They've got to beat Baylor and Kansas in order to get back into it. They're 2 games out. They're just off by a game, and a game they're going to probably win. So we'll see. I mean, I don't think you're off there in being able to say that Bill Self might be in a position to get his second championship there at Kansas. Big game last Saturday in the Pac-12. And Zona went up to Oregon and just got blowed up. But, game of the year for the Ducks. Dylan Brooks came alive. The only time they're going to play. Right now they're tied for the Pac-12 lead. I picked Zona in the early part of the year, and I'm going to stick by that for now for this reason. The Ducks have got to come this weekend to L.A. and play UCLA and USC back-to-back on Thursday and Saturday, and they just barely escaped UCLA at home, and then they lost to USC. Zona has to play both of those tough teams, but they've already beaten them once, and they've got them at home. And UCLA, which is still in the mix, but they've faded of late, they're going to have to beat all 3 of those teams to have a chance to win that now. So I think that by the end of this weekend we'll have a better idea of what's going on in the Pac-10. But every team that I mentioned is going to the dance. It's just a matter of, like you were saying, what does their end of the season record show, and how does that translate into a seeding?
Yeah, and I thought from our discussions earlier that the Arizona and Oregon were both undefeated, and then I looked at the standings and I saw that Oregon had a loss, and I thought, who did they lose to? And I looked back, they actually lost a couple weeks ago at Colorado. So they are actually tied. And, yeah, the big game Thursday night, Oregon coming to UCLA, and talk about another team that I think has a lot of pieces that could, if they got hot at the right time, maybe go on a run in March in the NCAA tournament, and that being UCLA with Lonzo Ball and the Leaf player. But, again, I think part of it is we have to look at, especially all the things we've looked at, is part of this is I think some of these freshmen are getting wore down in this college season, it being much longer, and with all the travel and other things involved in being a college student. I think some of these teams that rely on freshmen, we're seeing some freshmen start to hit a wall here as we get to the mid part of February. So part of it might be, can they recover from, I'm sure there's a lot of bumps and bruises, and a lot of them are tired at this point. But, yeah, the Pac-12's got some quality teams there. The Oregon Ducks, yeah, it's funny. I didn't see much of that game, but some of the Twitter was people were asking, because they were down by, or Oregon was up by, 20-30 in the first half, that is this score really right? Or is this somebody do a misprint here on the ticker?
No, I was watching that and flipping back and forth. Oregon came out and just put it to them from the 3-point line on their little Rorschach test of a court, which is really just pictures of trees up in that area. And Sean Miller just tried to keep them playing, and they did have a better second half there for Zona, but it was just one of those situations where the hurricane hit, and Zona will have to rebound from it, but I think they can. Well, that's pretty much the Big Six conferences that we covered, but I know for sure that you're going to want to talk a little bit about your Mastodons. How are they hanging in there in the Summit?
Mastodons only played one game since we last talked, and unfortunately they lost in overtime on a buzzer beater, a three-pointer, to Denver. So right now they stand 16-8 overall, 5-5 in the Summit League, which only ranks them fifth. But again, positive for you Mastodon fans is the next 4 games are at home for the Mastodons. I look for them to go on a run here, and of course, for the teams like Fort Wayne and some of the smaller conferences, we talk about March Madness. It almost starts at the end of February for them because, of course, in order to get their games on TV, and, of course, TV is important because TV equals money, they actually start their league tournaments a little bit earlier than the big conferences. So it's going to really start to ratchet up. But I'm sticking with the Mastodons. I think they're going to go out to South Dakota. Sioux Falls, South Dakota is where the Summit tournament will be played starting on March 4th, and I look for them to run it there and make some noise when it comes to the NCAA tournament.
Well, they've got the chance. They're going to play 3 of the 4 teams that are ahead of them at home. So if they can bring those back, who knows what will happen there in the Summit Conference. The one conference we've hinted at here and there, we've been giving little voice to each of these conferences as we go, would be the West Coast Conference. And for those of you who don't know what that is, that's the one that Gonzaga is in. And a good time to bring that up is because this Saturday, Gonzaga has to travel to St. Mary's, the other ranked team in there. Gonzaga beat St. Mary's earlier at home, so that'll also be for probably the West Coast Conference bragging rights. Can't see either of them losing in the conference beyond that. Gonzaga looking at 24-0, number 1 in the country. St. Mary's is 21-2, and they're number 20. The sad thing is, and this is why Gonzaga doesn't always get the love. They're number 1 now, but still they're not necessarily getting talk about for the top ranking. Is this conference is 3-27 against ranked teams, and of course that's not even taking out the fact that Gonzaga and St. Mary's have played each other. So that makes it 2-26 against ranked teams, and those other 2 wins are both by Gonzaga. This is a conference that's got some storied programs that have made noise in the past, but just not recently, and you hope they can get back. Or, like Cincinnati and UConn are doing, trying to find a tougher basketball conference to make some noise. Gonzaga may have to look elsewhere. This is the conference that has Loyola Marymount in it, but it's been 25 years since the run and gun excitement of Coach Paul Westhead and Hank Gathers and Bo Kimball. And they got the University of San Francisco, but it's 60 years since Bill Russell led them to back-to-back champions in the mid-'50s. And, of course, Santa Clara is known as the home of Steve Nash, but it's been 20 years since he led them to their last tournament appearance. And who knows, maybe the never leave the floor Herb Sendek can get them back. He's in his first year, but you have to wait to see. So, while I'm on that note, we do want to wish a happy 43rd birthday to Steve Nash, the Santa Clara stalwart. But it still comes down to Gonzaga and St. Mary's. I think Gonzaga is going to win, even though it's on the road. St. Mary's will give them a tussle. Those are probably the only 2 teams that are going to go to the NCAA tournament from there, and you just hope that next year's a better year for them. And while we're on that, too, another big game we talked about a couple weeks ago is Cincinnati have to go to Dallas to face Southern Methodist on Sunday, and Southern Methodist creeped into the top 25 this week, and that is a home court for them. Cincinnati's up to number 11, and they did beat the Mustangs by 2 on their home court earlier in the year. So lots of big games coming on here as we head toward the end of the season. Any final thoughts from you, Jim, before we go on to our trivia and tidbits?
Just on Gonzaga, I think their, success is, they need maybe to find another conference, but we've talked about before because of their location. Not sure what that is. Again, they would probably be a perfect fit in the Big East, being kind of the same Jesuit school as 9 of the 10 Big East schools are. They would fit perfectly, but their location, of course, probably doesn't lend to that. Another interesting tidbit, you did speak about UC and UConn maybe being in the same boat. There was some talk this week that maybe UConn is talking to the Big East about rejoining the Big East. Remember, they were a member of the Big East years before it was reorganized. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. Does the Big East really want them? And, of course, the thing that broke up the Big East the last time led to this reorganization was football. A lot of those schools wanted to go to a conference that had a bigger profile for football because football, of course, sometimes because of the money it brings in, kind of runs the decisions to be made. So, Gonzaga, I almost feel sorry for them a little bit. They're kind of left out there, and I don't know if they have any choice, and I think it'll hurt them in recruiting because even though, they get a lot of exposure due to their success and their number one rankings, I would happen to think that some players may say, well, I'm going to go play in the Pac-12 or the Big 12 because I know I'm going to be on TV more than I will be if I go to Gonzaga. So my only thoughts, but
lots of things that we'll have to see, and there's all kinds of things. The American with the football conference, UConn's talking about the Big East, but I don't think the Big East wants to get away, like you talked before, from having the 10 teams so they can play the home and away combination to not have a cockeyed schedule. But we'll just have to wait and see. Well, lots of exciting things coming into the last month, and we'll be here to report them all. We'll also be on the air on Thursday with our RazorCast about Xavier basketball, and join us then because big game coming up this Saturday against number 2 Villanova. So, Jim, I know you've got something waiting for me. What's it going to be this week?
Yeah, I was a little worried there. I thought you were signing off before trivia. I thought, man.
I would never give you your chance to try to make me look foolish on the air.
All right. Two-part question here. And again, talk about something that happened this week that we discussed a little bit. Kansas was defeated by Iowa State on Saturday in an exciting overtime game at Fog Allen Fieldhouse, which ended the longest winning streak in NCAA active runs, and that was at 54 wins. Can you tell me the last team to defeat Kansas at home, and it happened in February, this is your hint, February of 2013?
These questions you come up with are truly trivia. Last home win, I would have to say it's probably got to either be like something in the Big 12, one of those challenges, or a conference team. But it could have been just about anybody. If I went with a ranked team in their conference, Baylor wasn't quite at the pinnacle then. It could be. Let's go with somebody like a Colorado.
Good guess, but no, it was Oklahoma State who was playing very well at that time, and they were the ones who defeated Kansas last time on their home court. Now this one, I'm not going to give you. I was almost let a hint slip. You'll probably ask for one anyway. Or maybe you've come across this in your reading because it has been kind of mentioned in the media lately, is now that the Kansas Jayhawks don't have the longest streak in NCAA at home, can you tell me who the new leader is with 40 wins on their home court?
I believe that's Oregon.
That is. And that streak may go for a long time because when you got to go up there and play amongst the trees, I got to think that becomes distracting. So you are right. 40 wins for the Oregon Ducks at home. That is the current longest NCAA home win streak. So you got any interesting tidbits for me?
Oh, no, I'm not. Just a couple of fun facts as we go out through here. It was on this day in 1949 that Joe DiMaggio signed a contract to become the first $100,000 baseball player, which is about $400,000 less than the major league minimum these days. But it was a big thing then. In 1964, boxing champion Cassius Clay announced his conversion to Islam and changed his name to Muhammad Ali. And, of course, we lost the great Muhammad Ali in just this past year. And it was on this date in 1991 that Northern Kentucky native and Boston Celtics star and coach Dave Callen was elected to the NBA Hall of Fame. So there's always something going on. Got lots of great basketball to be played whenever your loyalties are, whatever your conference is. Come back here next Tuesday, and we will talk about all of those and much more on our TrogCast. And, of course, join us again on Thursday for our RazorCast.
All right. We'll see you, fans.